everybody. Welcome to the market-based approach for National WASH Cluster Response Plans webinar. My name is Julie Barra. I'm the Global WASH Cluster Deputy Coordinator. And I will present this webinar with Dana Christescu, who's our cash specialist at the Global WASH Cluster. Before we begin, let's do a bit of housekeeping. So webinar available in Portuguese today and Arabic. So at the very bottom, planet, a circle with stripes that says interpretation. You can just click on it and select your language. So it's not French and Spanish today, it's Arabic and Portuguese. I will give you a few minutes to set up the language you're most
لا I mean طولي بالك علينا.
Do you have any issues with the interpretation? And your language is okay. Give me 1 minute. Sorry, I'm back. Okay, next slide, please. So today we will have this webinar. So this is the agenda. We will have a presentation to just share some key points from the Global WASH Cluster on cash transfer and market-based programming. This will be done by Dana. And then we'll have a question and answer session. So feel free throughout the presentation to put the questions in the chat box or wait for the end and we can have a question and answer sessions for about 15-20 minutes. We'll have some group work following this to discuss within your countries the cash transfer and market-based programming challenges or enabling factors. We will finish by a small poll and then the next steps and closing remarks. Next, please. The webinar objectives are quite simple. We'd like to support the national coordination platforms and the key implementing partners to develop market-based approaches as part of the WASH strategic plan. So you're in the middle of the HNO, HRP is coming soon. So we want to make sure that you have clear in your mind how to integrate market-based programming in these strategic documents. We'll also like to reflect on challenges and enabling factors of MBP in your countries on market-based programming, and improve the understanding of the existing project. So we have an hour and a half to discuss all this. I will now leave the floor to Dana. If Dana, you can introduce yourself and carry on with the presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Julie. So my name is Dana Cristescu, and I am a cash advisor to the Global WASH Cluster. And I've been deployed to this role by the CashCap rosters from NRC. And I will go throughout the next half an hour through the main aspects in cash and markets that are relevant to WASH cluster work. Please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat box while I'm speaking, or if not, after I finish the presentation during the Q&A session, you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly in plenary. So next slide, please. First of all, I would like to emphasize that cash and markets or market-based programming forms integral part of WASH sector work, and for that reason, it has to be coordinated by the WASH cluster exactly as other forms of programming are coordinated. So at the national and the subnational levels, of course, we will have the usual suspects, the WASH cluster members, such as local and international NGOs, UN agencies, and so on. Of course, the government and the public utilities representative. But because of the market-based approach, what is new here are the private sector market actors. And it's true that we are not so used of having them in coordination meetings so far. But if we want them to participate, then their presence becomes more and more necessary. There is also an intersectoral aspect when it comes to cash and markets in WASH, because sometimes WASH actors will decide to be part of what is called multi-purpose cash, which is a form of cash transfer that covers multiple needs across sectors. And for this reason, it is necessary also to coordinate closely with the cash working groups. Of course, this is a very quick overview of what happens with market-based programming in coordination. You will have more in the newly updated guidance on market-based programming. And the link was shared, I see, even in the chat box. And now we have to go forward and look into what the WASH cluster can do in order to better integrate market-related aspects in its work. We've seen a few examples across the world with WASH clusters that set up a market-based programming technical working group under the cluster. This is not necessary, but it can help, especially when you plan more elaborate work, such as adapting to your context tools, guidance, and technical standards, or perhaps doing some joint market assessment and analysis, even capacity building or response analysis. But there are other aspects of market-based programming which can be dealt with very easily in the regular WASH cluster meetings. For example, if you want to work on the integration of market-based approaches in HNOs and HRPs, or work to propose a WASH component for the minimum expenditure basket. So if we move forward to this very general aspect of integrating cash and markets in humanitarian needs overview, I will focus on cash and voucher assistance, and this for the very good reason that there are requirements from OCHA to integrate cash-related aspects in the HNOs and in particular in the HRPs. Of course, you can go ahead and do more and also think about other aspects of market-based programming, but here I'll focus on CVA. So what is important to remember when you do the HNO and you want to consider markets? Well, I think the first step is really to consider if you need to do any market assessment. Because you will have, of course, the WASH technical assessment, maybe some multi-sectoral assessment, but these are all needs assessment. And if you want to dig deeper into how these needs can be met, then market assessment can be very useful and can support you in proposing some market-based response options. And second, if you want to be able to use cash and vouchers in the WASH sector, then in the needs assessment, especially when you interview households, you should look into cost. Try to understand if cost is a barrier to access to essential WASH goods and services. And here, of course, there are things that can be done in the WASH sector, but also you have to remember that multi-sector needs assessment usually collect data on household income, expenditure, and debt, and you can use that. Now, going forward to the HRPs, again, keeping this focus on CVA, there are a few very precise requirements on how to integrate this in the HRP. First of all, I think there is an overall expectation that you clarify whether cash and vouchers will be used to deliver some of the planned programs. And you should also provide a very clear justification on why you think that cash and vouchers should be used. Yeah. And of course, this should be based on the assessment data and the analysis that you will have presented in the HNOs. Then also there is an expectation to make a clear distinction between cash and vouchers for the very good reason that these have different degrees of flexibilities and work in slightly different ways, including on their impact on the markets. And state also the percentage of the response delivered by using CVA and the number of people you are planning to target with CVA. At the level of indicators, for the time being, there is no expectation that these are very specific. They should remain outcome-based. Okay, let's go forward and go back a bit to the HNO. So we said that a very important aspect is to do market assessment. And we go even further and we say you should do market assessment anyway, whether you plan any market-based programming in your further response or not. And this is because market assessment can make you understand what is the impact, the potential impact of all your programming to the markets, And at the very least, you should have this do no harm approach. Try not to harm the markets through direct implementation if possible. A very important aspect to remember is that market assessment don't happen in a void. We don't go and say, okay, what market assessment should we do? Just like this out of the blue. Usually we look first at the findings of WASH technical assessments, of multi-sectoral assessment, and we see what are the main issues there. Yeah, maybe there is a problem with the access to water, and then based on that we decide what markets to investigate, right? If there is a very acute issue with access to water, then maybe you have to look into the water market, right? Of course, the success of your market assessment will depend also on how good you are with designing and formulating your research questions. And this will depend very much on the context. It's not something that we can tell you here. There is no predefined set of questions. So there are certain very clear advantages of doing sometimes market assessment together as a sector. For example, when water is included in the minimum expenditure basket and it's covered by multi-purpose cash, then there is something which is called the JRAM, Joint Rapid Market Assessment, which is usually done by the cash working group for all the items included in the minimum expenditure basket. And it's, of course, very meaningful to be part of this. Sometimes the WASH sector conducts market assessment for a broader array of WASH items. Like, for example, it happened in Somalia in 2019, and you have the link on the previous slides to their report to see what they've done. It is just an example. I think at this stage, we don't have sufficient examples so that we can draw best practices from them. So we are just saying this is what was done in other contexts. Think about it if you can use it in your context, or you can adapt it, improve it, and so on. Going back to this need to select a number of markets among a very wide array of WASH markets, I think there are a few criteria that you can use in order to select the markets for your assessment. One of the criteria is to consider the existing insights, and this sends us back to what I said before, that you have to base the selection of the critical markets on what is already in the needs assessment. Like the needs assessment and the market assessment are two separate processes. They shouldn't be conducted together, but they are mutually reinforcing themselves. Then the markets you select will depend a lot on the humanitarian crisis phase in which you are. For instance, if you are in the acute phase of an emergency, then you'll probably look at some markets for life-saving goods, yeah, or services. While as in protracted crises, you will look more at those markets which foster sustainability and durable solutions. Then one very easy criteria is to consider in which parts the market system has been affected. Yeah, if you have certain goods for which the supply chain was affected in an emergency, maybe it's better to focus on those goods and their supply chain and do nothing else, at least in a first stage. And it's also good to keep in mind that a market assessment have this role of helping you identify bottlenecks and underlying causes when a very complex wash market or wash system is affected. Because market assessment have this tendency to be very detail oriented and to dig deeper. So once you have the data from the needs assessment, from the market analysis, the next step, which links the assessment phase with the strategic response phase, is the response analysis. And here, you will go towards choosing a response option, or rather several response options, depending on the capacity of the market system, of the disruptions that happened, and of risks related to each of the options you consider. And it will be inevitable, but both the supply and the demand side will have needs and limitations in an emergency. Yeah, maybe, of course, affected populations will have very clear needs that you know about water, sanitation, hygiene, and so on. But the supply side will also have needs. Yeah, maybe some of the traders had their shops destroyed, their stocks destroyed, and so on. And these are all aspects that can be considered in the response options. One very important step to remember, the risk analysis. Of course, here we are not going very much into details, but for all the aspects that I'm presenting, if you want more details, please go to that guidance on market-based programming, which was shared in the chat box and is shared also in this presentation. And you will find more resources and so on. So when analyzing the feasibility and the appropriateness of market-based programming, for example, if you think about cash and voucher assistance, you will have to know what are the right items available in the market, and the quantities in which these items are available. Then you will have to find out whether they are accessible to everyone and in all the right locations. Yeah. Then the prices of items are also important. Yeah, you need to consider, are prices easily affected by an increased demand and so on, or by a scarce supply as well. And then also consider whether the WASH actors are able or not to provide services according to needs and minimum standards. And based on this, you can decide whether to use the market or to support them, or a combination of the two. Or if these are not possible for various reasons, then of course direct assistance remains an option. And usually the response of the sector is a combination of market-based and non-market-based assistance. So going again to the options you have in the HRP, we will focus on cash and voucher assistance, which is the chief option when you want to use markets. But then we will go quickly also through the options you have to support or to strengthen markets, and we'll see what is the difference between the two. But for the time being, staying with cash and voucher assistance, we wanted to make clear which forms are considered cash and voucher assistance. And you can see in the table, in the dark blue column, all the examples of cash and voucher assistance in the WASH sector we could gather in a concise form. And this, include vouchers for water, cash for water, although more rarely, vouchers for household water treatment, household cash for latrine construction, for dislodging, for hygiene items, and so on. So all these forms of programming are cash and voucher assistance. In the light blue column, or the gray, I don't know how you see it, you find forms of market support. In fact, it's just that we wanted to emphasize that these are all market support and not cash and voucher assistance to the households. So we wanted to present to you this decision tree because it's a very concise view of what happens during response analysis in the WASH sector, or for that matter, in any sector. You start with the question on market system before emergency, because if they worked well before emergency, then you can continue and ask yourself whether the market system would respond well to necessary demand if created in the emergency affected situation. And again, if the answer is no, then you could ask yourself whether the constraints that exist in the market system could be resolved or overcome in good time. And if not, then recommend more detailed market system analysis. And in the meantime, favor in-kind or other forms of direct assistance. But you can see here that if the markets can respond well to the necessary demand during the emergency, then you can very well do cash and voucher assistance. If you can address the market system constraints in a reasonable amount of time during the emergency, then you can also favor indirect action to strengthen the market system, which in turn will help you to use cash and voucher assistance at the same time or in the very near future. Because we are talking here about the minimum, about cash and voucher assistance, I think it's good to remind that multi-purpose cash is a form of cash and voucher assistance. And in order to be able to design the transfer value in particular for multi-purpose cash, you need to have a minimum expenditure basket. The minimum expenditure basket is defined what a household requires to meet its basic needs on a regular or seasonal basis, and its average cost. And usually WASH items will be part of it. I think the bottom line here is that you need to ask yourself, are people buying any WASH related items like goods or services in normal times? If the answer is yes, then wash needs to be in the minimum expenditure basket. On the other hand, if people are not used to buy wash-related items in normal times, it is probably not during an emergency that you will persuade them to do so. Yeah, so this is really the thumb rule for deciding whether wash has to be in the MEB or not. And usually at least a few items are there. And there are several ways of constructing a minimum expenditure basket. The first one is the expenditure-based approach. The second one is the right-based approach. And the third is the hybrid approach, which combines the first two. In each of the cases, the wash sector will need to be involved. In the expenditure-based approach, because usually this expenditure survey on which it is based is conducted for all the sectors together. So, and that it's conducted, it's a one-off survey usually. So you'll have to understand very well what are the constraints and the biases that may result from, for example, from the time the survey was implemented and so on. Yeah. So sometimes, depending on the timing of the survey, certain one-off expenditures may not be there. But the expenditure-based approach is not so much used as a self-standing approach. It's usually combined with the rights-based approach. And the rights-based approach consists in identifying, based on standards and on needs assessment, which goods and services have to be included. And here you can also refer, for example, to the SPHERE standards. Yeah. Okay, so we've seen what can be done with cash and vouchers. Now, another possible response option, as you've seen from this decision tree, is to support the markets on the short terms. Yeah. For example, if the emergency affected the traders, and if the traders do not have the financial capacity to bounce back by themselves and to rebuild their shops, to reconstitute their stocks and so forth, then you can consider using grants, guarantees, and supporting them to get access to the financial market. Sometimes market actors will need capacity building and technical support. For example, in a more complex market, and like the water market. You will maybe need to support the supporting services. Yeah. For example, when doing water tracking, the fuel market is a very important supporting market, and it's one of the typical interventions of the WASH actors to support water trackers with fuels for vouchers for fuel, for example. So these are only a few examples of market support interventions that can be considered. So then what is the difference with the next option that we mentioned? Can we have the next slide, please? With the market system strengthening. So the main difference is that we talk about market support more or less on the shorter term, while market system strengthening has already a development angle in it. And it's something that can be done more easily in protracted crises. There we have, again, a wide array of possible interventions, such as delivering new service delivery, developing new service delivery models, or doing social marketing, improving policies, or building demand for paid services. And these are all interventions with which all WASH market actors are very familiar with, but in development context. We've seen a few examples of this happening in protracted emergencies. For example, improving the policy. It's an intervention done in Lebanon, in informal settlements of Syrian refugees for the water market. All right, can we go forward, please? So again, I'm not going to mention any of the business as usual aspect of the cluster work. Of course, monitoring in general, it's something that needs to happen. But here I want to focus on market monitoring, because markets are dynamic systems, and it is extremely important that we continuously check our initial assessment and check if the initial findings of the assessment are still at those parameters that we identified. Yeah, markets can change very quickly, especially in an unstable context. And then if we do not take into account the changes in the market, the programming we do based on markets may have a harmful effect. And of course, we can also do market monitoring to understand if the programs that we implemented are achieving their objectives. Sometimes there are also important seasonal variations in the market. So again, one more reason to remember and monitor the market. And here too, I want to mention that market monitoring is something that can be and should be done collectively, because the markets are not something fragmented, yeah, and they are the same for everybody involved in the humanitarian response. So it's an important cost-saving factor if we do the market monitoring together. And you have here on the slide a couple of examples from Yemen and Somalia. You'll see the main aspects they monitor are prices and stocks. Still in the monitoring, but at the cluster level, and back to the CVA focus, we have now requirements to integrate CVA into the cluster 3, 4, or 5 Ws, whatever you have. And you will find in the links the suggested standard and optional fields to be included. And also a very brief guidance, a one-pager from the Global WASH cluster on how to do this. And just to finish, and I think right on time, we put on this slide the main resources that became available this year from the Global WASH cluster. We have first of all this big evidence building study for cash and markets for WASH in emergency, which actually includes 5 different reports, of which one reviews the impact of various market-based programming on WASH outcomes. And then 3 other reports focus on each of the subsectors. And the last one is focused on WASH in multipurpose cache. So I probably find the whole market-based programming universe in this first study. And then, as we mentioned before, we have the new WASH technical guidance on market-based programming, which was reviewed this year extensively based on the evidence building study findings, and it was launched in the beginning of September. We also have a very concise tip sheet on integrating cash and markets in HNO and HRPs. And we have a database which contains all the reports that were reviewed for the evidence building study. So if you read the evidence building study and you find their examples and you would like to know more about them, look for them in this database. And then for those of you who maybe remember, we also have the recording of the introduction to MVP in WASH webinar, which was done last year. So this is all, and now I am happy to answer any questions you may have. And back to Julie.
Thank you very much, Dana, for this insightful presentation. So I was checking the chat. I didn't see any questions. A lot of people introduced themselves. Thank you very much for this. So are there any questions from the group? You can take a few minutes to think about it. Feel free to ask anything related to your current experience or situations you're in and you're a bit stuck. We're happy to discuss this, or I mean anything on the presentation that Dana just delivered, if there was anything that wasn't clear or you need more information on. Yes, Falem, you have a question?
No, sorry.
All right, if there's no question, we'll move to the group work, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions then there. So you will be, yes, as instructed on the screen, directed to breakout rooms. Is there any question from Bukunul Hassan? Okay, no. So yeah,
sorry, I don't have any questions. Sorry.
That's no worry. No, I just wanted to make sure. No problem. So yeah, you'll be redirected to breakout rooms. They are named after your country. So we have Mozambique, we have Bangladesh, Syria, Palestine, Ethiopia, Libya, Myanmar, and Somalia, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So exactly. So we will put the Jamboard link in the chat right now. I'm doing this. So if you can, okay, you have it in double. Good. So if you can click on the Jamboard and browse for your country. So there are little arrows on the top. You can go right and left, and you will see countries, yeah, one after the other. And we have a question, so I'll go back to that afterwards. So when you go to your group work, be together in the room to discuss the two questions. So the first questions is about the main challenges that you find to coordinate and integrate market-based programming throughout your humanitarian response, throughout the HPC, so HNO, HRP, but it could be beyond that. And then the second question is about the enabling factors that you've identified that could allow you to develop a more robust cash and market-based programming approach in your country. So yeah, the floor is yours. I think we have 15 to 20 minutes to discuss in the groups. The breakout room link is not there yet. So before we go, I'll just take the one question that was in the chat from Shamsur Rahman. It was a very good presentation. Thank you very much. I want to probably understand how it can be implemented in the refugee context of Cox's Bazar, where there is no income-oriented operation for this group. Dana, do you want to answer this question? Maybe we need some clarification on what you mean.
Yeah, I would also ask for a bit more detail, because unfortunately I don't know much about the refugee context in Cox's Bazar. Well, before you provide us more clarifications, maybe it's worth saying that we have cash and voucher assistance, and sometimes even some small market support in the camp context, whether refugee or IDP. Yeah, but because sometimes refugee camps are a rather closed universe, depending also on where they are, yeah. I think we tend to have less market-based interventions in camps on average, of course. I'm not saying that we don't have them at all, but the options we have are more limited. For instance, I'm aware that at some point UNHCR did cash for latrines in refugee camps in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it was possible, yeah. I think we would need to know more about that refugee context in Cox's Bazar before being able to answer the question in more detail.
And maybe I can just add to this that if you want, in the end, there will be a poll, and this poll is about asking if you want to have an hour discussion with the Global WASH cluster, so including Dana, our cash specialist, cash advisor, just to discuss your very particular cases. So you'll have that option. If you answer yes to that poll, we'll make sure that we reach back to you in within few weeks, or I mean, a couple of weeks maximum, so we can discuss this. Shamsur, if that's your interest, we can definitely discuss this bilaterally after this webinar. This is also why we're here, so that we can, you know, at least raise issues. I'm not going to solve everything here for sure, but at least we know what the issues are, and we get back to you to unpack this further. So if there are no further questions, we will launch the breakout rooms. So Nicole, yeah, go ahead. So choose the room that corresponds to your country and click on the Jamboard link. And once you're there, find your room. So any comments or any first thoughts to share about this exercise? Was it useful? Was it, did it bring some further questions maybe you would like to discuss with us today? I see that some countries were very active. Myanmar had a lot of inputs.
I think we had a lot of input, and then we had some questions or requests for support, I guess, in some ways. But just there's multiple challenges here. We would like to do it, but how we do it is the issue. Over.
Yeah, no, I was reading your board, and it's clearly, I mean, it clearly seems quite complex. But I'm sure we could find ways to unpack a bit of the challenges you have here. So if you'd like this, we can have a further discussion on this, Jeffrey and your team.
Yeah, I think we would. That was one of the sticky notes. Is that definitely would have a one is to go through it, then also support from the Global Wash Cluster on the current systems we have in place for some of the partners, and are they in line with the HRP and the global issue, the global way of working, but also the Myanmar HRP. Over.
Okay, great. So I take note of that. Thank you very much. Bangladesh also had seemingly a good discussion on MVP programming and coordination. I don't know if Bangladesh wants to say a few words.
Yes, thank you. This is Rafat from Bangladesh team. We discussed about a lot of issues there, and mainly we are also having some question and doubt, because in Bangladesh we have some program with refugee operations and also some national wash program all in working on there. So we have some doubt, confusion, and we have some debate about contribution and the real market-based program that which one should we calculate or continue. That sometimes it will be the contribution of the beneficiaries, or sometimes it will be the total system will be done by the beneficiaries. So which one shall we continue in this? That will be our contribution. And around this also we have some challenges there about the income generation, and also we find out some solution like avoiding cash and using some vouchers, which needs some donor supports also in that situation. That means also we need to create some sustainable systems and sustainable market channels in our country if we have to continue this step. So thank you. This is over from.
Great. I mean, great questions here, and thank you very much for your intervention. I guess we can also, if you can dedicate an hour of your time so we can continue this discussion in bilaterally. I think that would be very necessary if that's if you have time for that, that'd be great. Great. And we also had Ethiopia who contributed to the discussion, Palestine, Somalia. Is there anyone else who would like to say a few words? And
yes, Julie, I have a small question, if you allow me.
Sure, of course, Mohammed, go ahead.
Yes, I want to ask about the issue of the small markets, the issue, because we discussed that we have, when you have a small closed market, like the Palestinian one, and I think we have different areas suffering the same issue, where we have low demand. And especially when we're talking about, let's say, humanitarian products. How we can, let's say, promote the market-based programming in that, if we really have weak market, restricted, closed, and on the same time small, as I said, low demand. So, for example, if I want to purchase a product for my humanitarian response, I will not find many suppliers doing this, because it's like nobody is asking for this product, just a few organizations. It's not like a competitive market.
So it's low demand, but also low offer, if I understand correctly.
No, we are talking about low demand. The issue of profitability is something else, but here about the demand itself, especially when you're talking about, let's say, you need to import stuff and you have low demand, so you will face different challenges.
I will leave the floor to Dana. If you want to provide some element of answers.
Yeah, I mean, it's for sure it's hard to to answer because there are a lot of details that we don't know, like what type of items we are talking about and how small is small and so on and so forth. But there are certain types of market support which are exactly focused on boosting demand. It's just that it's usually an intervention that takes time, yeah. Like for example, you have used in Washington development a lot social marketing, so things like that, yeah. But because I don't know at all the context and so on, it is very, very hard to say if this would be appropriate.
And can we know which product you were talking about?
Yes, I will give a small example about the, this is the household water treatment units, the water filter. You know about
I was sure it was something like
yeah,
no,
okay.
Because usually low demand is something like water treatment.
Yes, so these water filters, just the NGOs or let us say the humanitarian actors who are providing. So if we purchase per year 1,000 units, who will be, let us say, putting investment or working in this, let's say, it low demand product? And that's what we faced. After a while now, we don't purchase it. No one of our partners want to implement such activity because it's not feasible. Let's say it like that.
Yeah. So if you want to read more about that, Mohammed, I recommend you go to the evidence building study. It's on the last slide of this presentation, of my presentation, in fact. Go to the evidence building study, to the water report, and it has a section entirely dedicated to household treatment, water household treatment products. But you will see this is one of the tricky areas in which our colleagues who did the review didn't find a lot of examples. And then what they found was really, like, it showed that it's really a market that is very difficult to stimulate, at least in emergency context.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Idir.
And yeah, it's always, you have to couple this, of course, with the hygiene promotion and community mobilization. And yeah, it can be triggered, but it's kind of difficult. That's for sure. But happy to discuss this further, Mohammed. I have experience on this kind of project, so I'll be happy to discuss this if you have more time on this. So I think we are moving on now, actually, to the famous poll question, which is about telling us if you need more support and if you'd like to. So we can dedicate to start an hour discussion between Dana and myself, and maybe also Ross, our field support deputy coordinator. So he'll also be happy to join the conversation. So yeah, it's just for us to be able to record your answers and make sure that we get back to you. So just take a few minutes to answer the poll, and then that will be it. Okay, we're looking at 100%. Appreciate your enthusiasm. Okay, thank you very much. So 18 of you requested some support, so we'll group that by country and invite you for this this little clinic we'll have as a start, and see how we can guide you through more support or just answers in more details. I understand this can be frustrating just on a 1-hour webinar where we don't have all your answers covered. So that's why we want to make sure we have extra time for you. Great, thank you so much. Was a pleasure spending this time with you. Dana, do you want to say a few words before we close?
Oh, I just wanted to thank you, all of you, for the active participation, and hope to speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dana. And moving on to the next steps. So cluster partners to work together on a plan to integrate MVP in strategic documents. So this is actually what the conversations we'll have further will help on. There is a revised training package on market-based programming that is available, that will be available by the end of the year, and it will be translated in 4 languages. So you will have access to this, and we're actually looking for trainers who would like to pilot this one. So the English version, looking for 25 people, and we're also looking for 45 people interested in a TOT, so a training of trainers, for those who would like to become MVP trainers. So we will send more comms on this one, but more an email, but just FYI. And yeah, we will monitor the integration of cash markets approaches in your HNO HRP for this year, for 2022, I mean. Not that it's a must, of course, but it would be nice to understand why it's not being considered. As you know, it's one of the grand bargain commitment, and we need to make extra efforts to make sure we have this modality understood and considered in our responses. Thank you so much, everyone. That was it. I appreciate your attendance. We had a big group today. That's nice. I hope this was insightful and inspiring for your HNO, at least. I suppose you're drafting it at the moment. So I wish you all a very good day, and let's talk soon. Thank you. And thank you, Nicole and the interpreters, for the great work. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.